يا رايحين على مصر مين يبعت سلامي في كلمتين يا أهل الله، مشتاق لناسها الطيبين ودي ياما فيها مخلصين يا ما شاء الله، وفي أزهر العلماء تقدر تقول ما تشاء، ده أنا والله بدعي لهم رب السما وقولوا آمين إن شاء الله إن شاء الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا، وأنت يا حي يا قيوم تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. This is inshallah the second session in this series of lessons that are meant to provide a guide to a student who wishes to pursue studies in the school of Imam Shafii. In the last lesson we were talking about some of the unique features of the Shafi'i school, and we mentioned a number of them. And somebody might hear all of this and say that this is I'm biased towards the Shafi'i school, and a lot of these things are exaggerations. So I wanted to share with you a quote from a famous Sheikh from the Indian subcontinent who died in the 12th century Hijri by the name of Shah Waliullah ad-Dihlawi. Shah Waliullah ad-Dihlawi rahimahullah ta'ala. He says in his book Al-Insaf, and he's a subcontinent, a scholar from the Indian subcontinent, a Hanafi primarily in his upbringing and in his practice and in his scholarly opinions as well. He says in his book Al-Insaf that the school of Shafii has produced the most number of absolute mujtahids, the most number of intra-school mujtahids. So absolute mujtahids meaning that people who perform ijtihad without sticking to any school. And then intra-school mujtahids meaning mujtahid fil madhab or mujtahid muntasib, meaning that a mujtahid, an imam who performs ijtihad while restricting himself to the principles of a particular madhab. So Shah Waliullah is saying that the Shafi'i school has produced the most number of absolute mujtahids, the most number of intra-school mujtahids, the most number of jurists, theologians, Quranic exegetes or mufassirun, hadith commentators, and hadith transmitters. And he continues to say that the school of Imam Shafi'i is the most meticulous in preserving the opinions of its imam, distinguishes his opinions from the opinions of his students, and establishing preponderance. All of this is obvious to anyone who has any experience with studying the various schools of thought. End quote from Shah Waliullah ad-Dihlawi. And this is a fair statement from a scholar who was a mujtahid in his own right from the 12th century subcontinent. And this is also another unique feature of the Shafi'i school, that you can find an abundance of Shafi'i scholars in literally every science, every Islamic science. So for example, in jurisprudence, in usul al-fiqh, we have people like Imam al-Juwayni, Imam al-Baydawi. They were Shafi'is. In the field of hadith, we have people like Ibn Khuzaymah, Ad-Daraqutni, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, they were all Shafi'is. And I don't want to give too many names, I just want to give examples to show that you can find in every science a number of Shafi'i scholars. In history, in Tariq, we have people like Imam al-Dhahabi and Ibn Asakir that were Shafi'is. In the field of theology, we have people like Imam al-Razi and Imam al-Amidi that were Shafi'is. In the field of tafsir, we have people like Imam al-Baghawi, Imam ibn Kathir that were Shafi'is. In the field of qira'at, Quranic recitation, we have people like Ibn al-Jazari and al-Qastalani that were Shafi'is. In the field of linguistics or Nahu, we have people like Ibn Malik and Ibn Aqil that were Shafi'is. And finally, in the field of tasawwuf, we have people like Imam al-Qushayri and Imam al-Ghazali and others that were Shafi'is. So just the sheer amount of scholars that this school has produced is also another unique feature of this school, to the extent that some have said that if one wanted to study all the Islamic sciences and restrict himself or herself to Shafi'i scholars only, it's possible to do that. It's possible to do that. So this was just an introduction talking about some of the unique features of the Shafi'i school. And we want to now move on and talk about Imam al-Shafi'i himself, the life of Imam al-Shafi'i, which is the second part of this series, insha'Allah ta'ala. So the name of Imam al-Shafi'i is Muhammad ibn Idris ibn Abbas ibn Uthman ibn Shafi' ibn Sa'ib ibn Ubaid ibn Abd Yazid ibn Hashim ibn al-Muttalib ibn Abd Manaf. And the reason why I mentioned this long lineage of Imam al-Shafi'i is to point out that his lineage ends at al-Muttalib ibn Abd Manaf. Hisham ibn al-Muttalib ibn Abd Manaf. And Abd Manaf was the person at whom the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ meets with the lineage of Imam al-Shafi'i. Because Abd Manaf had al-Muttalib as his son, and then Hashim as the son of al-Muttalib. And Abdul Muttalib, who was the grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ, was a nephew of al-Muttalib, and therefore Abdul Manaf was the grandfather of Abdul Muttalib, who was the grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ. So Abdul Manaf is the grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ, and he is the point at which the lineage of Imam al-Shafi'i meets with the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ. And therefore, Imam al-Shafi'i is considered to be Muttalibi, Hashimi, and Qurashi. Muttalibi, Qurashi. So he is considered to be min ahli bayti Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, min ahli bayti Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, from the household of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And indeed that's a great honor for anyone to have. Imam Shafi'i was born in the year 150 after Hijrah in Gaza. In the year 150 after Hijrah in the city of Gaza. And 150 after Hijrah is the same year in which Imam Abu Hanifa passed away, rahimahullah ta'ala. Then when he was 2 years old, in 152 after Hijrah, Imam Shafi'i traveled to Mecca. And there he memorized the Quran at the age of 7. And he also used to go out out of Mecca and mix with the Bedouin tribes that were known to have the purest form of the Arabic language, in particular the tribe of Hudayl. He used to spend a lot of time with these tribes developing skills in the Arabic language. He also memorized a lot of Arabic poetry during that time. Also in Mecca, while he was in Mecca, he studied with people like Sufyan ibn Uyayna, who was a great hadith scholar in Mecca who died in 198 Hijri. And he also studied with the Mufti of Mecca, whose name was Ibn Khalid al-Zanji, who also died in late 2nd century, 179 Hijri, who was the Mufti again of Mecca. So as you can see, from a very early age, when Imam al-Shafi'i is barely a teenager, he is learning with great scholars of his locality, people like Ibn Uyayna, people like al-Zanji. And al-Zanji, who was the Mufti of Mecca, he was so impressed by Imam al-Shafi'i that he gave him a license to issue fatwa when he was 15 years old. When Imam al-Shafi'i was only 15 years old, the Mufti of Mecca, al-Zanji, gave him the license to issue fatwa. So this is how he developed as a young scholar in Mecca until the year 163. In 163 Hijri, he travels to Medina. He travels to Medina, and there he meets the great Imam of Darul Hijrah, Imam Malik ibn Anas, rahimahullah ta'ala. Now, Imam al-Shafi'i, actually, there is a story behind him going to Medina to meet Imam Malik. And I'd like to share with you this story because it has many lessons that we can learn from. So, according to this narration of the story, it says that, and this is Imam Shafi'i himself talking about how this all transpired. So he says that I was in Mecca and I used to mix with Hudayl, the Bedouin tribe that I mentioned earlier. And I used to learn from them, and I used to learn especially from their language. And they were the purest of all Arabs in their language. So I spent a lot of time with them, and I would spend days and nights with them as well. So when I went back to Mecca, when I would go back into the town of Mecca, I would say some of the poetry that I had learned and some of the things that I had learned from Hudayl. So one day, a man passed by me, and he said to me, Ya Aba Abdullah, O Aba Abdullah, it's hard for me to see a person like you who is so eloquent and yet does not pursue a serious study of the Islamic sciences, in particular fiqh, ilm al-fiqh. So Imam Shafi'i looked at this man and he said, is there anyone left in this town, or is there anyone left in this world that should be sought, that I should go and try to learn from? So he said, yes, Malik ibn Anas, the master of the Muslims. So Imam Shafi'i said that this struck a chord with me. This stayed in my heart. And then I finally made a resolve to go to Medina. So he said that I borrowed the book of Imam Malik called Al-Muwatta from somebody in Mecca, and I began to memorize it. And I memorized the entire book. And then I went to the governor of Mecca, and I requested him to write a letter recommending me to Imam Malik. And then I took that letter to the governor of Medina. And I gave him that letter. And then when the governor of Medina read the letter, he said, "My child, it is easier for me to go from Medina to Mecca barefoot than to go to the doorstep of Imam Malik because of the humiliation that I'm going to have to face." So Imam Shafi'i said, why don't you ask him to come to you? If you feel humiliated to go to the doorstep of Imam Malik, why don't you ask him to come to you? And so he said, that's never going to happen. The governor said, that's never going to happen. And then he said, come, we'll go. So he got his entourage together, the governor of Medina, and then he got on his ride, on his mount, and he went to the house of Imam Malik. And there, he asked one of his men from the entourage to knock on the door. So a slave girl came out from the house of Imam Malik, and the governor of Medina said to her, "Go to your master and tell her that I am here to see him." So the slave girl went inside, and then she took a long time to come back out. Then when she came out, she said to the governor of Medina that my master is saying that if you have a question, then write it down on a piece of paper and send it through send it through me, and he will send you back the response. But if you have something else that you want to talk to him about, then you know when his lessons are held and where they're held, so just come at the time of the lessons. You can go now. So the governor said to the slave girl, tell him that I have a letter from the governor of Mecca about something important. So the slave girl went back inside and came back out with a chair, and she put it outside the door, and then Malik came out. And Imam Shafi'i now describes Malik. He said Malik came out, and he was an old man with a sagacious look. He was tall, and he had this daunting appearance, this intimidating appearance. And he was wearing some head covering. So he came and he sat down on the chair, and the governor of Medina presented him with the letter from the governor of Mecca. So he started to read the letter until he reached the statement that said that I'm sending you this noble man, so talk to him and do with him this and do with him that. So Imam Malik, when he read this part, he threw the letter and he said, Subhanallah, has the knowledge of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam come to this point that it has to be taken through intermediaries? Has the knowledge, has the teaching of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam come to a level where it has to be taken through intermediaries? So Imam Shafi'i said, I looked at that point at the governor of Medina, and he was scared to say a word. He was too scared to say a word. So at that time, Imam Shafi'i said that I stepped forward and I began to speak with Imam Malik, and I said, Aslahak Allah, inni rajulun muttalibi. He starts addressing Imam Malik, and he says, may Allah rectify your affairs. I am a man from the tribe of Muttalib, and this is what I'm here for. And he explained to him why he's there. So Imam Shafi'i says that when Imam Malik listened to me, he looked at me for a few seconds, and he had tremendous insight into people. Imam Malik had firasa, he had insight into people. That's what Imam Shafi'i is saying. So he said to me, what's your name? So I replied and I said, my name is Muhammad. So Imam Malik said, Muhammad, fear Allah and avoid His disobedience. for verily you are going to have a tremendous role to play in this life. So I said, Imam Shafi'i replied to him and he thanked him for saying good words about him. And then Imam Malik said to him, tomorrow come to me and I'll ask somebody to teach you the Muwatta. So Imam Shafi'i said, I can read the Muwatta without even looking at it. In other words, I have it memorized by heart. And then he says that I sat down and I started to read the Muwatta from my heart, and every time I became too nervous and I wanted to stop, Imam Malik would be amazed by my recitation and he would tell me, continue, read more, read more. And he said until I read to him the entire Muwatta in a few days. And then I stayed with Imam Malik until he passed away, rahimahullah ta'ala. So this was the first meeting of Imam Shafi'i with Imam Malik, after which he stayed with him all the way until Imam Malik passed away, which was in the year 179. So all in all, Imam Shafi'i spent 16 years of his life studying as a devoted student of Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala. In 179, Imam Shafi'i traveled to Yemen and he stayed there for 5 years, primarily to work. He was somebody who grew up in a very poor household and he wanted to find some work, so that's why he had gone to Yemen and he worked there for 5 years until the year 184 when he went to Baghdad. We'll stop here inshallah and we'll continue from here the next time. Wa sallallahu wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
الله الله يا ربي الله الله ومن قلبي علي توضى كده مني الها صلى الفجر ولف في مصر وحواليها الله الله على الأزهر الله 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 أكبر أم الدنيا كمان واكتر لو قلت اوصفها أنا مش هنصفها وكفيها الله الله